Hi, folks, with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the way movies and TV and advertising, pre and product advertising, and so on, government adverts, the way it's tried to change the race and gender roles of Western society. They don't do this in other societies. It's only white Western society it's the beneficiary of this globalist, organised, planned, scripted hatred. But anyway, let's have a closer look. What brought me onto this was there was a TV show that about 25 years ago, 26 years ago, that I rather used to like, and I used to set the video recorder in the days when that was a thing to record it. And if I missed, I was often sort of working late and that sort of stuff. So when I would catch up with it later, I quite liked it. It's kind of a sci-fi type thing. But I remember at the time sort of noticing how the show was changing, how the main female character, who was 5'2" tall and weighed 110 pounds, how they were changing her to be like the dominant character. Instead of, she wasn't the chick being rescued, she rescued the 6'2" muscle guy. So she would be she was the one who was way smarter, a genius in science and all that sort of thing. And she was the best shot, and even in high heels, she could catch the baddie. Whereas he couldn't, he'd fall over and that sort of thing. The baddie bad guys would knock him out effortlessly, but when she came along, she kicked ass left, right, and center. There could have been 1,000 bad guys. She would kick the shit out of them and take them and rescue the guy. Now, when the show began, it wasn't like that, but they clearly made a decision. Now, when you've got the whole lot on a collection, and you can go from episode to episode and look at little bits. So I remember that episode, and you can cover the whole year in just an hour or two, going through it. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and then it becomes really stark. You can tell the writing, and then you can go and look at the writers. They changed the writers, so they started bringing in feminist activist writers to push this. Now, at the time, I didn't really notice that. I noticed the change, and I thought, I wonder what that's all about. Back in the day when I wasn't as sort of tuned into what's going on, but they actually made a conscious decision, obviously, and you can see it now. A conscious decision to take a more feminist line, to use it as use the TV program as a vehicle to re-engineer society. And so, well, this is not how men and women do behave, but it's quite normal that a 5'0" 100-pound chick in high heels is going to run around and beat the living daylights out of some 6'3", 250-pound muscle guy, and she's going to do it without even breaking a sweat. And that's just how. So that it became progressively more ridiculous because of that, and I lost interest in it and didn't really watch it for a couple of years. And then somebody mentioned that they'd smartened up their act and got back to the basics, and I went to look at it again. So it was on for, I don't know, 5 years, I guess, and the first 2 years were quite good. Then they went 2 years of utter propaganda, and blatant propaganda, by the way. It wasn't concealed or made an end. For example, there was an episode I was looking at where, now she's a junior sort of law enforcement officer in effect, and she walks into the middle of this room full of men in their 50s and 60s who are far senior to her, not just in age but in status. The police chief of the city or something like that, and she walks in the middle of the room and says, "And I want this, I want that, I want so and so, I want so," and they all meekly run around like little gay boys, mincing around to do what she says, and come back to begging for her approval. And clearly that was created and scripted, and they brought these feminist script writers in to do it. So now I can go online to look at these script writers, and you can see quite a lesbian sort of theme of the real domineering woman and the mincing men sort of on their knees groveling, and this was written by lesbian activist feminist writers, the classic gender studies academic and so on. So they were purposefully going to these activists. I assume they were told to, the show's creators, or now given where the finance was coming from, it's the same people that today, the finance for the show, it's the same people that today are pushing the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the ESG and that sort of thing. So the same people. So the ESG and the DEI and all that that's a direct, if you like, evolution of what they were doing in the 90s or the 1980s and 1990s. So we're looking at an evolving propaganda and social re-engineering process that was going on then. Now, just on the base of that show, I then went and looked at a few other shows that were around around that time, and noticed the same thing was happening at about the same time. This doesn't matter whether the show was in Australia or in the United States or in Canada or in Britain or whatever. The same thing was happening. They were, especially things like cop shows were the favourites, but they suddenly, there were black female police commissioners were suddenly appearing, and they were really strict, and those white boys knew their place. And her job was to put those damn straight fucking white males in their place and let them know who the fuck was boss. And it was, again, very silly. And, these silly, scrawny women running around karate chopping and so on. In what was, you can see the splicing in of the stunt man who's dressed in women's clothing, by the way, a stunt man coming in to play. The whole thing was ridiculous, quite absurd. And when you look at it now, you're knowing with the hindsight and the knowledge we have now, you can see the deliberate, willful attempt to insert propaganda all over the place along race and gender lines. But it was all to diminish straight white men. None of it was really to elevate black women or lesbians. It was to diminish straight white men. That seemed to be the common purpose throughout. And again, we see that far more clearly today, but it was through certainly through those times. So looking back, this is an evolution that, as I say, has been in the works for a while. It's really been a continuous program that where they've nudged. I mean, you can call it nudging, where they've nudged it along just a little bit every year. It's been nudged just a little bit further. So what was considered quite edgy back in the day, a black police commissioner or something like that, and female, it would have been whoa. Whereas today you'd be surprised if it wasn't a black lesbian, because that's how far things have come. Now, does that mean that the average person is agreeing with this or thinks it's sensible? I don't think so. I think everybody knows it's an absolute load of nonsense, but the globalists are so full of themselves that they think that they're they've got us all conned. And again, I point out to, after 70 years of communism, where 95% of the population of the Soviet Union knew nothing but communism, and where there'd been 45 years or so of communism in Eastern Europe. So again, the majority of the population only knew communism. As soon as they had the chance, all the people in the Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe as well, of course, they couldn't get away from communism and Soviet communism quick enough. They threw it almost the day that they could, they threw it off. And you'd think, well, that they knew nothing but communism. Why wouldn't they want to stay with that? Why wouldn't they think it was the best system? But no one believed the lies they were being told on the TV and the newspapers, and no one believed any of that. So they knew it was all a crock, and they knew it didn't work, and they could see the dysfunction, and so they were glad to be rid of it. So I don't think anyone's really buying this in the West, all this silly propaganda and nonsense. Now, some people say, well, James Bond is silly, but we know it is. They're not trying to re-engineer society. It's silly and it's ridiculous, and it's he's this sort of combination between a superhero and so on. But they're not trying to re-engineer society. They're not putting it forward as propaganda to change everybody's mind and perspective. It's just purely entertainment, and this is the difference. This is what they're doing with they're not using it as or delivering entertainment. Their purpose is to socially engineer society by inserting propaganda into these, again, the movies and the TV shows and so on. But again, the primary purpose of it is to diminish straight white males rather than to elevate any others, or any other parts of society. So, I mean, just looking at, there was, for example, that there's a new play in stage play in England where, and it goes on the Robin Hood myth. Now, the Robin Hood myth is a great myth. This the fight against oppression, and the guy that steals from the rich and gives to the poor and sticks up for the dispossessed and so on. I mean, that's a great story as just a feel good thing. And for people that are poor, not at the top, don't pull strings, don't make decisions, will live and die a life of relative drudgery, then stories like Robin Hood sort of make them feel good and think, oh wow, that's great. Wish Robin Hood's around today, that type of thing. Now, the setting of Robin Hood, for those who don't know the history, the King Richard of England went to the Crusades in the Holy Land, around Jerusalem and where we modern day Israel and so on. And they were fighting the Islamic hordes, and the general there was Saladin, quite a competent general, and King Richard of England was also quite a competent general. He was actually a Norman, so he was really sort of French, but the French had conquered England, so they possessed that. Now, the taking a large army over to that, covering those distances, that was a pretty expensive gig. Took a lot of money, and it was really beyond the resources of England to pay for a military adventure like that. As an inducement, the papacy did pay for some of it, but the Pope, to flatter King Richard, called him in French, Coeur de Lion, the heart of a lion. So it became Richard the Lionheart. Because of his exploits and he won some pretty significant military victories over there. But the local Islamic hordes always had the benefit that it was their backyard. They had better resources and supplies, and so over the long game, they were always going to win, and they did. Now, because it was such an expensive undertaking, the cost of that war over in the Holy Land, the Crusades, the British taxpayer or the English taxpayer had to stump up the cash. So Prince John, who was, I'm going from memory, he was King Richard's brother. He was left in charge, so he had to put the screws on to the local populace to raise the cash and other things, gather men and material to send over them. But so he got the rather thankless task of having to raise the cash, and it went down like a lead balloon. And the local lords and barons got rather sick of the increasingly arbitrary methods used by the monarchy to extract taxes from them, and they rebelled, and that became the basis for the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta, I think, was something that many people will have heard of. Now, just coming back to Robin Hood, though, there's it's sort of in myth and fantasy, really, rather than reality, that Robin Hood is cast. It's effectively a novel, but the story has always been, it was set in medieval England, and there was not a black person in sight, and they were all ex-knights or ex-military men or local sort of village men who'd run off as outlaws. They didn't usually make women outlaws in those days, so really, the men had to run away. But and they lived in Sherwood Forest, which is near Nottingham and just north of London, and so they were all white people at the time. There would, if even there was a single black person in England at that time, there would have been one. And any black people there would have been, say, employees of like the Spanish court or something like that. They wouldn't have been roaming around in fucking Sherwood Forest. So But in the remaking or retelling of Robin Hood, now Robin Hood is a central, myth, legend, central story about historical England. So it's something that the globalists have said, they've made their list up. Well, you have to attack that. That's quintessentially English. So attack it, tear it down, debase it, subvert it, fill it with black lesbians, retell a story where there's only black lesbians and that sort of thing. So the effort at subversion. And I've noticed in that Robin Hood thing that I think it's 50% of the cast is black and 50% is female. Maid Marian, who's like the love interest of Robin Hood, as I understand it in the stage play they've just made. Maid Marian's a lesbian who gets married to another woman in the stage play. I mean, this is the extent of the debasement of English tradition and history and fables and tales. And you see it in other, like we saw the Legend of King Arthur. His love interest was black. Or brown, Indian, maybe Pakistani, something like that. So, and they're doing it to all the English myths and legends, Scottish ones. They're systematically going through all of them and debasing and subverting them, so that the entire history of England, as told by these fables and tales, will all be about black lesbians now. And they seem to be rather pleased with themselves. Now, I read a few sort of reviews. Now the magazines like The Guardian or media outlets like the BBC in England, they gush about how wonderful this is, because they say the medieval time in England or elsewhere, the medieval time was about female and racial erasure, that women and black people were, the race and gender hustling, which is the globalist shtick, that they were erased from history. They didn't exist. Well, where did Maid Marian come from? What about they've been erased from history? So really, by making sure that Robin Hood's merry men and all these people that they're all black lesbians, that's just compensating for the evil fascist Nazi erasure that went on in the past. Today is an enlightened period where black lesbians are everywhere. Just can't you feel it? Can't you feel it? And that just shows these fucking white supremacist Nazis that we're in charge now, and their time in history is gone. They're just a shit on our shoes of history. So and so this is just redressing the evil wickedness and racism and misogyny of the past, so they claim. Now, why they have to pick Robin Hood? Why don't they pick their own ones? Why don't they create a new character, like the Butch Dyke lesbian of Nottingham or something, and then make a story about that? And then she can run around, killing all the white people. She can genocide the entire white population of the universe in her this fantasy role. I wonder how many people would actually pay to see that. Hard to say. But why don't they create their own characters, their own myths and legends? But instead, they have to attack all the white ones. Anyone would think it was a globalist plot. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.